The rain wasn't just water falling from the sky, it was a cold, steady drumbeat of bad luck. Inside her tiny apartment, Angelica counted the last of her money for the 10th time. The numbers didn't change. They were too small, and the debt she owed to a man named Sal was too big. It was a debt left behind by a past she desperately wanted to forget, a ghost that refused to stop haunting her and her 7-year-old son, Gavino. "Mom, is everything okay?" Gavino asked, his big brown eyes wide with a worry no child should ever know. Angelica's heart squeezed. She forced a bright smile, pulling him into a tight hug. "Everything is perfect, my little lion. Just planning a special pasta for dinner." She lied to protect his light, the one pure thing in her difficult life. She would do anything, to keep that light shining. The knock on the door was not a friendly tap. It was a heavy, solid thump, thump, thump that shook the thin wood on its hinges. Angelica's blood ran cold. Gavino clutched her leg. Slowly, she opened the door. 2 men in dark, perfectly tailored suits filled the doorway. They weren't messy or loud like Sal's usual thugs. They were calm, professional, and that made them infinitely more terrifying. "Angelica Moretti?" the taller one asked, his voice a low, polite rumble. It wasn't a question. "Don Franco Lombardi requests your presence." Franco Lombardi. The name was whispered in fear throughout the city. He wasn't just a bad man, he was the king of all bad men. The man even Sal was afraid of. Why would someone like him want her? The air in her lungs turned to ice. I have my son," she stammered, her voice trembling. "He will be safe here." "For now," the man said. The unspoken threat hung in the air, heavier than the rain outside. "Come with us quietly, or he won't be safe." The choice was no choice at all. With a shaking hand, she kissed Gavino's head, promising a friend would come stay with him, her voice cracking. She walked out into the rain, the 2 men flanking her like stone sentinels, and got into a sleek, black car that smelled of leather and power. The car didn't take her to a scary, dark alley. It glided to a stop in front of a beautiful, old stone building. Inside, it was like a palace from a movie. Marble floors gleamed, and expensive art hung on the walls. It was silent, except for the soft tick of a giant clock. They led her to a pair of heavy, dark wooden doors and ushered her inside. The office was vast, with a fireplace crackling warmly. But the room was cold. And in the center of it all, behind a massive desk, sat Franco. He was not what she expected. He wasn't a snarling monster. He was young, maybe in his late 30s, with sharp, handsome features and dark hair swept back perfectly. He was reading a document, his posture relaxed but radiating an energy that made the very air feel still. He finished reading, placed the paper neatly aside, and then he looked up. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, and they pinned her to the spot. They didn't blaze with anger, they were calm, calculating, and utterly freezing. They traveled over her, from her rain-damp hair to her old, worn-out shoes, missing nothing. "Angelica," he said. His voice was deep and smooth, like dark chocolate, but it held no warmth. She couldn't speak. She just stood there, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I understand you have a problem," Franco continued, leaning back in his chair. "A problem named Salvatore Rossi. You owe him a significant amount of money." She found her voice, a fragile, defiant whisper. "I'm paying him back. As much as I can." Franco gave a small, dismissive wave of his hand. "Sal works for me. Your debt, therefore, belongs to me. And your payments are insignificant." He stood up, and he was taller, broader than she had imagined. He moved around the desk with a predator's grace, stopping a few feet from her. She could smell his cologne, something dark and spicy, and it made her head spin. "I am a businessman, Angelica. I see a lost investment. I have 2 options. I can have my men collect. It would be unpleasant. For you, and inevitably, for your son." Terror, sharp and blinding, seized her. "Please," she begged, the word tearing from her throat. "Don't touch my son. I'll do anything." A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. He had her exactly where he wanted her. I proposed a second option. A deal. I will wipe your debt clean. Every last cent. It will be as if it never existed. Furthermore, I will extend my protection to you and your son. No one will ever bother you again. You will have safety, security, forever. It sounded like a dream. It had to be a trick. What do you want in return? She whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. His stormy eyes held hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in their depths, not warmth, but a deep, profound loneliness. You, he said, the single word hanging in the silent room. You will come to my home. You will live here, under my roof, for 10 nights. During this time, you will have dinner with me. You will talk with me. You will keep me company. You will be present. Angelica stared at him, confused. For 10 nights? That's all? That is the agreement, he said, his voice firm. You will be a companion. In return, your old life is erased. But understand this. He took a step closer, and she felt the heat from his body, saw the intense focus in his gaze. For those 10 nights, you are mine. You do not leave. You follow my rules. This is not a request. It is my offer. The word, mine, echoed in her head. It wasn't said with desire, but with possession. She was a thing to be acquired, a solution to his boredom, his loneliness. Shame and anger warred with the desperate need to protect Gavino. She saw it all clearly, 10 nights of humiliation, of being near this terrifying, magnetic man, in exchange for her son's entire future. A lifetime of safety. She looked at Franco, at his cold, handsome face, at the power that rolled off him in waves. She thought of Gavino's smile. Her fear was a living thing inside her, but her love for her son was stronger. She lifted her chin, meeting his stormy gaze with a fire he clearly didn't expect. Okay, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll do it. For 10 nights. And in that moment, as their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills, neither of them knew that this deal, born from fear and power, was the first step on a path that would change both of their lives forever. The clock on the wall began to chime, marking the end of her old life and the terrifying, thrilling beginning of something new. The car ride to Franco's estate was a silent, tense journey. Angelica held Gavino's small hand tightly, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The grand stone mansion, surrounded by tall iron gates, looked less like a home and more like a beautiful prison. Inside, it was all echoing hallways, priceless antiques, and a silence so deep it felt heavy. A stern, older housekeeper showed them to a luxurious suite, a bedroom for her with a connecting room for Gavino. It was the most beautiful space she had ever seen, but the gold-trimmed walls felt like they were closing in. The first dinner was a quiet, awkward affair in a dining room large enough to host 50 people. They sat at opposite ends of a long, polished table, the clink of silverware on fine china echoing loudly in the space between them. Angelica answered Franco's polite questions with single words, her eyes fixed on her plate. Yes. No, thank you. She was fulfilling her part of the deal, but her spirit was locked away, hidden behind a wall of fear and resentment. Franco watched her, his stormy eyes unreadable, his own replies just as brief. The change began, as it often does, with the pure, unafraid heart of a child. On the third morning, Gavino, bored with his new, lonely room, found his way to Franco's study. The door was open. He peeked in, clutching a toy car in his hand. Franco was on an important phone call, his voice low and commanding. He glanced up and saw the small boy hovering by the door. He was about to wave him away, his expression stern, but then he saw the toy car. It was cheap, red plastic, one of the wheels slightly wobbly. Gavino, emboldened by curiosity, rolled the car carefully across the polished wooden floor. It wobbled its way to Franco's expensive leather shoe. Franco ended his call. The room was silent. He looked down at the little car, then at the boy's hopeful, nervous face. Slowly, a movement so deliberate it seemed to surprise even him, Franco bent down. He picked up the car, his large, powerful hand making the toy look tiny. He rolled it back gently across the floor, straight into Gavino's waiting hands. A wide, brilliant smile broke out on Gavino's face. "It goes fast," he whispered. A strange, almost foreign feeling tugged at Franco's chest. He gave a single, slow nod. "Yes," he said, his voice softer than Angelica had ever heard it. "It does." That small, shared moment was a crack in the ice. The next day, Gavino presented Franco with a drawing. It was a picture of 3 stick figures, a small one with brown hair, himself, a taller one with a yellow scribble for a dress, his mom, and a very tall one in the middle, colored entirely in black, holding a big, lollipop-like object. "That's you," Gavino explained, pointing to the black figure. "You have a big presence." Franco took the drawing. He didn't smile, but his eyes lost their stormy chill for a fleeting second. He looked at the 3 figures standing together. He didn't pin it to his expensive corkboard with his important documents. Instead, he placed it carefully in the top drawer of his desk, a secret treasure. Watching this from the doorway, Angelica felt the first stone in her defensive wall begin to loosen. She saw the way her son, who was usually shy around men, was completely unafraid of Franco. And she saw the way Franco, the man who commanded armies of hardened men, didn't know how to handle a child's simple kindness, but was trying. The 5th night, after Gavino was asleep, Angelica found Franco not in the grand dining room, but on the terrace, looking out over the moonlit garden. The air was warm, filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. "He talks about you constantly," she said softly, coming to stand a few feet away. "He thinks you're a superhero." Franco didn't turn. "He is a good boy. You have done well with him." The simple compliment, spoken so genuinely, disarmed her. "It's just been us for so long," she found herself saying, the words spilling out. "I was so young when I had him. His father, he wasn't a good man. He left us with nothing but that debt. I've been running and fighting ever since, just to keep a roof over our heads." Franco was silent for a long moment, listening to the crickets. "I understand fighting," he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "My father built this empire. He taught me that power was everything, that trust was a weakness. You sit in this big house, surrounded by people, and you are the most alone person in the city." He finally turned to look at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes stole her breath. "No one has looked at me without fear or greed in a very long time. Until you. And you only look at me with hate." "I don't hate you," she whispered, surprised to find it was the truth. "I was afraid. I am confused." This was the beginning of the shift. Their conversations after that were no longer a duty, they were a craving. They talked for hours after Gavino went to bed, sitting in the library. He told her about the weight of his legacy, the constant vigilance. She told him about her dreams of going back to school, of creating a real, stable life. The air between them began to crackle with a new, dangerous energy. The spicy tension started in small, electric moments. One evening, as she reached for a book on a high shelf, his hand was there, brushing against hers. A jolt, like a static shock but warmer, shot up her arm. They both pulled their hands back as if burned, their eyes locking. The air in the library grew thick and hard to breathe. Another night, during a quiet dinner for 2 at a much smaller table, he told a dry, witty story about a business rival, and she laughed, a real, unforced laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. He stopped talking, his fork hovering in midair, just staring at her. The look in his eyes was no longer one of cold calculation or even quiet loneliness. It was intense, focused, and full of a heat that made a flush creep up her neck. She felt seen, truly seen, and it made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The 9th night was balmy and clear, the sky dusted with stars. They found themselves walking side by side along a gravel path in the moonlit garden, the silence between them now comfortable, charged. "Tomorrow is the last night," Angelica said, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Franco replied, his tone unreadable. They stopped by a fountain, the water glistening like liquid silver in the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and unspoken words. She looked up at him, at the sharp line of his jaw, the way the moonlight caught the intensity in his eyes. He was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world. Angelica, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a wildfire through her veins. She didn't pull away. She leaned into it, her eyes fluttering closed for a second. That was all the invitation he needed. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly tender. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to refuse. But she didn't. She rose onto her toes, meeting him halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a release of all the built-up tension, all the unspoken words, all the confusing, powerful emotions of the past 9 days. It was passionate, desperate, and full of a raw, aching need that shocked them both. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his solid body, and her hands came up to clutch at the lapels of his jacket, holding on as the world tilted on its axis. It was a kiss that tasted of jasmine, of longing, and of a terrifying, wonderful future. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, they just stared at each other. The deal, the debt, the fear, it all melted away in that single, searing moment. The man was no longer her captor, and she was no longer his prisoner. Something real, something wild and beautiful, had been born in the ashes of their arrangement. The 10 nights were almost over, but for the first time, Angelica was terrified of being free. The 10th morning dawned, and the beautiful mansion felt different. The sunlight streaming into Angelica's room didn't feel like it was illuminating a gilded cage, but a home she had grown to love. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, a hollow, yawning mouth. Every item she placed inside felt like a betrayal. The kiss in the garden last night had changed everything. It had rewritten the rules of their deal in a language of fire and longing. Downstairs, the air was thick with unspoken goodbyes. Gavino, sensing the shift, clung to Franco's leg during breakfast. "Will you still race my cars with me?" he asked, his little voice wobbling. Franco, who once struggled to hold a toy, now knelt down effortlessly, his eyes level with the boy's. "I will always race your cars with you, little lion," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made Angelica's heart ache. No matter what. The final day was a quiet, painful dance. Angelica packed slowly. Franco buried himself in work, but his focus was shattered. The grandfather clock in the main hall became the villain of the story, its steady, ticking countdown a reminder of the impending end. The last dinner was a somber affair. They ate in the small, cozy breakfast nook, not the grand dining room. The food was delicious, but it tasted like ash. The conversation was stilted, filled with memories of the past 10 days. They talked about Gavino's drawings, the day he beat Franco at a car race, the book they had all read together. But they carefully avoided the future. Finally, Gavino was asleep, tucked into his luxurious bed for what could be the last time. The moment of truth had arrived. Angelica stood in the grand foyer, her small suitcase at her feet. Franco stood before her, his hands shoved into his pockets, his usual powerful stance replaced by a vulnerable tension. "The car is ready," he said, his voice rough. "Your debt is cleared. You are free." The word, free, hung between them, feeling like the heaviest chain of all. Angelica looked at the door, then back at him. The man who had terrified her now looked at her with a desperate hope that mirrored the storm in her own soul. "I don't want it," Franco whispered, the confession tearing from him. He took a step closer, his stormy eyes blazing with a raw, unprotected truth. "This deal, it was the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I was forcing you to be mine for 10 nights. I was wrong. In these 10 nights, Angelica, you have captured me. You have owned me completely." He reached out, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, from real. "I brought you here because of power," he continued, his gaze locked on hers. "But you and that brave little boy, you showed me what real power is. It's not in fear. It's in this. In the way my heart stops when you walk into a room. In the way his laughter makes this big, empty house feel like a home for the first time in my life." He took a deep, shaky breath, the most powerful man in the city brought to his knees by love. "I love you, Angelica. Not because of a deal. Not because I have to. But because you are the strongest, most beautiful person I have ever known." And I love Gavino as if he were my own blood. He squeezed her hands. Say, please. Not as my prisoner but as my partner. As my family. Stay because you want it. Choose me as I have chosen you. Tears streamed freely down Angelica's face. This was the choice she never saw coming. Freedom was a lonely apartment, a life of struggle, a world where no one looked at her the way Franco did. Staying was a future filled with his fierce protection, his surprising tenderness, and a love that had grown from the most impossible soil. She thought of the cold, lonely man in the office 10 nights ago, and the man before her now, laid bare, offering her his heart. She thought of Gavino, who had already lost one man, finding a true father in Franco. She wasn't choosing the mansion or the safety. She was choosing the man who learned to play with toy cars for her son. The man whose kiss felt like a promise of forever. A radiant smile broke through her tears. She let go of her suitcase, and it fell to the marble floor with a soft thud, the sound of a chains breaking. My heart was never in that suitcase, Franco, she said, her voice clear and strong. It's been yours for days now. I choose you. I choose us. The relief that washed over Franco's face was transformative. He pulled her into his arms, and this kiss was different from the passionate one in the garden. It was a seal, a vow, a gentle, profound promise of a new beginning. 1 year later, the same garden where they had first kissed was filled with light and laughter. Instead of moonlight, strings of delicate fairy lights twinkled overhead. Instead of two lonely people, there was a crowd of people, a few trusted friends, the loyal house staff, all beaming. At the center of it all stood Angelica, in a simple, elegant white dress, and Franco, his eyes shining with a happiness no one had ever seen in them before. Gavino, standing proudly between them in a tiny suit, held the wedding rings on a pillow. I, Franco, take you, Angelica, to be my family, he vowed, his voice carrying across the quiet garden. Not because I have to, but because I choose to, every day for the rest of my life. I will protect you, cherish you, and love you with everything I am. Angelica's smile was blinding. And I, Angelica, choose you, Franco. My protector, my partner, my love. Forever. As they kissed, husband and wife, Gavino cheered and wrapped his arms around both their legs, completing the picture. The 3 stick figures in his drawing had finally come to life. Franco's power was no longer a weapon, it was a shield for his family. Their love, which started with a scary deal, was now a forever, built on the most powerful foundation of all, trust, and the freedom to choose each other. We hope Angelica and Franco's unexpected journey to love fascinates till the end. If this story touched your heart, then your support means everything to us. Please subscribe to our channel for more dramatic, spicy, and heartfelt romance stories. We have so many more tales of love against all odds to share with you. And now, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Tell us your country and city in the comments below. Let us know what you thought. Did you cheer when Angelica chose to stay? What was your favorite moment between Franco and Gavino? Share your thoughts and feelings. We read every single one.